We made it to the last session, everybody. There's more people here than I thought we were going to be, so I'm happy to see that. My name is Mike Bruckner. I'm the IT director at Buckley Sandler in Washington, D.C., and a member of the ILTACON Planning Committee. So today's session is getting more out of your MDM solution. For those of you who are tweeting, the hashtag is ILTAG146. Please remember to silence your phones and other devices. Also remember the session's being recorded, so if you have a question, just let me know and we'll get a microphone over to you. And don't forget to fill out a session evaluation. Thanks very much.
All right, thanks. All right, today's session is getting more out of your MDM solution. MDM is mobile device management. So the focus is going to be on mobile features I see in deployments that are being underutilized or not properly understood or not properly deployed. So we're going to focus on most of those and see how you can properly understand them and maybe make a better informed decision on choosing an MDM provider if you're choosing one. All right, just a little background. My name is Vidit. I work for Cornerstone Information Technologies. I'm primarily a Citrix engineer, but we're consultants, so do all sorts of stuff. And I've worked on several mobile device management deployments. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the traditional challenges to mobility. So just stepping back a little, let's think about extending the workplace to making it mobile. So initially, you'd extend it by when they first had computers in an office, then they had home PCs. You set up something like a terminal services or virtualized desktop, virtualized app experience. So you get kind of a unified experience, right? And it's secure, it's locked down. You don't have to install you don't have to put any company data or files on the client endpoints, right? And so this is something we're familiar with if you're using Citrix XenDesktop or VMware View or Hyper-V for desktop delivery. This is something we're using today. So once laptops came around, the solution was easily extended to laptops. But we have a problem once we're looking at this vast array of devices. So many years ago, enter Palm Pilots, Blackberries, then the iPhone, Android devices, and now we've got Surfaces, Windows phones, Google phones. I could go on for days just listing how many different types of devices there are, right? So the challenge now is you've got all these devices. I mean, there's an expectation of bringing your own device to the workplace, using it for productivity, and you don't have any control over this device, and you also can't deliver a unified user experience, right? Anybody who's tried to connect, they have, for Citrix, for example, they have receiver, or if you're trying to connect to a terminal services environment through your phone or a tablet, anyone who's tried that knows this is not a lot of fun to work. And they try to sell it to you and say, no, you can work on this tiny little window. But, it's not a rich experience, right? You're not going to be very productive on the go. In addition to this, now we have, more frequent, more pervasive security threats, which we're all aware of, and there's, as everyone knows, increasing demands for compliance, right? Regulatory compliance, legal compliance. If you've got relationships with a financial group or a bank, they often will ask you to be in compliance. So, I guess let's get a show of hands here. How many of you actually have an MDM solution right now? All right, great. How many don't or are looking or thinking about getting one, looking into one? Okay. All right, so let's talk about what we're going to do today. We're going to focus first on just features that I'm not really sure there's much awareness about. I don't see them utilized a lot, and they're really great. We should really look at these and see how we can help you extend your solution. Then we're going to talk a little bit about trying to be productive on the go, right? Mobile application management. Then I'm going to touch a little bit on enterprise file share and sync. So, how can I take my documents, use them on the go securely, share them securely. And lastly, we'll talk a little about the cloud and really why you should be thinking about the cloud and moving to the cloud. One other point here, I'm the only speaker. I don't know if I was bad last year or what, but feel free to interrupt me, ask questions. There is a formal Q&A at the end, the last 15 minutes. But if you have questions, you want to talk about something, feel free to interrupt me. All right, so the first feature I want to talk about is Timeout. So when you deploy your MDM solution, you want to enroll or provision a device, right, on your server. So what do? You put your user in an Active Directory security group, and they're going to use their Active Directory credentials to download, an app, put their credentials in, log in. So that gets you into the MDM server. And then at some point, you want to install certificates, profiles onto the device to secure it and to have control over it, right, to have your MDM agent on there. And so then the user has to enter their device passcode, usually some sort of PIN. Then you can set, once they've got the device provision, now you've got the policies associated with their security group that you've set in the MDM server. So those are going to come down. But you have this question of how often do you need them to be checking in with the MDM server, right? So you can set, the device passcode, usually you don't want to be too aggressive with that. Most people lock their devices. I've seen a few exceptions where some partners didn't want any passcodes on their devices. That's it's tough, but you got to deal with some of these idiosyncratic users. So you're going to set a few policies here. So you've got your device passcode, and you're just going to leave something reasonable like 5 or 15 minutes. There's going to be policies on your MDM server. How often are you going to poll? Are you going to check in with the user? Then there's actual authentication and timeout policies. So if you're using ActiveSync email and you're delivering company email, how often are they going to be asked to enter their email password again? Right. So just to give you an example, say you have two, say in Zen Mobile, something I'm familiar with, you have an idle session timeout. So if nobody's using an app, it gets backgrounded. You're not checking your email. When are you going to be prompted to enter your passcode? There's another setting, a forced session timeout. Right, so I'm working on my phone. I'm just a workaholic. I'm working 25 hours a day. I'm just working all the time. When is it going to still force me out? Now, I've seen certain pain points where there's a desire to be very secure. Well, there was a sample case. One of my clients, they had a VIP, and he was a workaholic, and he was working all the time. And he was really complaining about the deployment. He said, I'm getting kicked out every 25 hours. And we went and we looked at their MDM server, and all the timeouts were extended. They were very long. They were like a week, 2 weeks for the 4-session timeout. So I asked him, I said, I know we've looked at it, but can we go look at your load balancer, your gateway? And so we logged in, took a look, and right there on the policy, there was a 4-session timeout, 25 hours. All right, so you need to be careful here and look to match settings. If you've got settings on your MDM server and you've got settings on your load balancer or gateway, they need to match up. You don't want to have conflicts here like they did in this case. Another thing I've seen is actually extending them too far. So there was a desire at another client of ours to, a few partners didn't want to ever enter their password on their mobile device. When 6 months had passed and they had to change their AD password, they changed it once. They don't want to change it ever again on any other device. So they were using a Kerberos method, not going to get technical here, but a Kerberos method to force the token down to the user. Now, I guess that's fine, but you've got zero user impact. You've really got zero compliance. What happens if this device gets spoofed, cloned? You have to have a really tight workflow here to identify a rogue device, a stolen device. And if it's powered down, you may have issues tracking this thing down. All right. So the next thing I want to talk about was flexible authentication. Most MDM providers at this point allow you to leverage just whatever you got on your device for authentication. So if you're like me, you got an iPhone, you're using Touch ID. I don't want to enter a separate passcode to get into my phone because my company wants me to use their MDM solution, right? So I really encourage you, if you haven't already, to leverage whatever authentication types are available for Android, iPhone. I haven't seen an MDM provider that doesn't or isn't moving towards supporting these. And these are much more secure than your basic PIN or passcode. Right? If you're looking at some of the new Samsung devices, they have facial recognition, or they actually look at your eyes. The number of combinations there are much, much greater than, say, a four-digit PIN or an alphanumeric combination. All right, then a little bit on the security side. Again, a sample case here. We had a client, and they had multiple MDM solutions because they were trying to manage different endpoints. They had one MDM solution that could manage iOS and Android, but they had a bunch of shared MacBooks in-house, and they had to use a different solution for that. And I think last year we were talking about this, and I told them, you should look at unified endpoint management. A lot of these solutions now are moving towards not being just mobile anymore. You can lock down Windows 10 devices, MacBooks, often even regular PCs. Right? So you can leverage this and extend your solution. If you're using multiple endpoint management solutions, look at your MDM provider, look at others, see if you can unify this. It'll save you a lot of money and save you a lot of management hassle. Right? You don't want to have to manage multiple endpoint management solutions. I have enough trouble managing one. The other piece I really see not being used really at all is software white and blacklisting. And this is really software control. So you have control with the device if you're doing MDM. Or you can push certificates down to the device. There's often wildcard support. So if you've got a kiosk device, a loaner device, somebody's visiting your office, you give them a PC or a phone to use while they're working on a case. You could use a wildcard and just lock down any sort of app being installed on there and only open it up for whichever apps you want to allow. Similarly, if you got company devices, you can preload certain applications. So if you've got RSA, or you've got Lookout or security apps you want your users to have, you whitelist them, which means it forces them to download them. Right? It's going to keep prompting you to install, or it's going to actually force the install on the endpoint device. This is also useful really for security because MDM doesn't really have two-factor, right? Because as many of you know, if you're going to use two-factor, you use your phone to get your second factor to log in. So you can't use two-factor to get into your phone. So how are you going to do two-factor? Well, there's kind of a workaround. You just install a certificate, right? And now you know this is a trusted device. And this is also useful often for third-party applications. Sometimes you're having trouble getting a third-party application to work. Say it's on your intranet, or you've got a federated service in the back end, or SAML. You can often use certificates to spoof some of the authentication, or as a workaround, so the application actually works better. So if you're not using that, look at that, because it's a really deep feature, and it'll really help you. The third feature I've seen that, in security I want to talk about that I don't see used is network restrictions and geolocation fencing. So again, if you've got company devices, loaner devices, you've got visiting employees, temporary employees for the summer, and you're giving them devices, you can restrict which networks they can use. Right? You can restrict. You can obviously restrict whether the device is jailbroken or not, right? And what you would do is you'd set some policy action. So if a device gets jailbroken or a device isn't on a certain network, they don't have access to, say, certain applications. Or the device gets locked. Or, more severely, say they leave the city and you want to wipe this company device, right? So you can do a remote wipe, revoke the device completely. So why would you want to do this? Well, I actually saw a situation with a client, and they had 2 employees, and they often traveled to a China office they had. So one of the employees had 2 devices that were dedicated for traveling to China. He didn't put any personal data on them, and he just updated the software on them periodically, like once a month, and didn't use them except when he was traveling. The other user didn't like managing multiple devices. So he would back up his devices and do a wipe, and not just a regular wipe. He would do a complete wipe of the system so that You can't pull anything off of it remotely. And I mentioned them. I'm like, why don't you just set up policies for yourself? I mean, you're relying on user compliance here. What if somebody forgets and they take their data to China, right? And you're worried about corporate thefts, or just theft in general, international travel and issues with that. So you put in this policy and they cross a certain longitude, and the next time it checks in, it's going to wipe their device or lock it. You can set whatever policy action you want. And I mean, they can still manage their devices, but now you've got this extra layer of compliance and regulation security there. All right. Let's move on and talk a little bit about mobile application management. So you've got your MDM solution. You've set some passcodes, some policies. Maybe you've restricted some network, where they can go. You've got some geofencing in place. But your user's still not productive on the go, right? You've got a secure device, but they can't work on the device. So most MDM providers now have an MAM component, a mobile application management component. What is that? It's usually an office productivity suite, right? And your standard suite is going to have a mail and calendar and contacts application. It's going to have a secure web browser, right? You probably are going to have some sort of mobile editor for Office, working on documents or spreadsheets. You're also going to have a file share and sync feature, which we're going to talk about, and you might have chat, depending on which solution you're looking at. So, why consider this instead of the defaults? Well, you want to lock down your company data. You don't want them to be able to, just use native iOS. If you're using native Android or iOS mail, you can take that mail, you can take documents, and you can take them and put them anywhere, right? There's absolutely no restriction to that. So the first thing to look at is for mail, if you're using Exchange, you're leveraging ActiveSync for your mobile devices. If you're rolling out an MAM or MDM solution, look at restricting your traffic for ActiveSync through your MDM server, right? So if you've got a load balancer or gateway, whatever the virtual IP is, you want to restrict the traffic flow through that. So that means your user can't log in to their mail from any other application or tie-in or any dependency. So these applications, generally, they're going to come with a custom code wrapped around them. So you have our Office Productivity Suite, and what it does is it gives you this extra layer of control. They're not just regular Office apps, right? There's a layer of policy and security control, so you can control whether someone can cut and copy, inter-app data flow, whether someone can exchange documents, take photos from their phone, put them, in the app. They can take attachments, pull them out. This idea is called containerization, right? Because you're containing the data inside these apps. This gives you a few options that are, extend beyond on your normal productivity. So you can do things like per app micro VPNs, depending on your solution. You can also, this is something you should consider. If you've got an MAM deployment, ask your MDM, MAM provider, does your application suite have its own layer of encryption? Because if it doesn't, what happens is, say you're on the go, you've got this employee, he goes to China, right? His device gets stolen on the plane, he doesn't realize it. They power the device down. They hack the device, right? They get the encryption keys to the device. If your application suite is leveraging the device encryption, it doesn't have its own layer of encryption. Once you get the device encryption keys, you've got the keys to the application suite, right? You're in. You can get to the company data. So a lot of providers now have been moving, some have been resistant, but a lot of providers are now moving to set up or purchase their own set of encryption that they can build in to their application suite. The salespeople don't talk about this. You need to check on this because this really is an important security concern. So the difference would be if you've got your own layer of encryption in the applications, you can set up different policies. for geolocation, for network restrictions, for being jailbroken. So even if the device gets turned off, you still have required, the application to check in with the MDM server periodically. And if it doesn't check in, you can't open the application. You can set up script or set up some policies to wipe that data. And anyway, it won't matter. If it's got its own layer of encryption, they can't get into it, right? It's locked. It's useless for them. Another thing to consider is whether or not your MAM is requiring MDM. You may not want to actually control the user devices. Maybe your users don't want their devices to be controlled. You can still deliver a unified experience for them and have policy controls and be in compliance with only MAM. Right? You can set per application a requirement that they need a device passcode. So you don't have to do that at the MDM level. You can do that at the MAM level. So this is much more BYOD friendly than a full-fledged, just MDM, MAM combined solution. So it's something to look at whether or not it's detachable from MDM. Another thing I should mention also is there's often custom actions here. Sorry, this is the next slide. Sorry. There's often custom actions you can script. So if I'm not a programmer, but if you have an app dev team or a DevOps team and they're developing in-house applications, you can work with these MDM providers. They'll often give you an API, or an SDK or something that you can actually use to containerize, right? Get those policy controls into these third-party apps. And one example case where this was used, and it's not fully successful, but they're trying to use, is for an RSA token, right? They want to be able to email users an RSA token, be able to open up in the RSA app. So that's something you could try to script. Similarly, I've seen some bigger firms have their own applications. They don't like what the MAM or MDM providers provide. They like to really hack into the code, customize everything. Right? So you want to look at what kind of freedom do you have. Are you going to be limited to just the suite given to you by your MDM provider, or do you have options? Or do you have other options? And keep an eye out also on the MAM front. A lot of providers have been promising and moving towards universal apps. So this would be the idea that it's not just mobile anymore, right? You could deliver these applications on their Chromebooks, on company devices, on company laptops. All right, so now you've rolled out MDM, you've rolled out MAM. Now users can work on the go, but they don't have their documents, right? So you don't have this unified, seamless experience that I have in the office when I'm working in a virtual session or on terminal services. I want to go home. I just disconnect. I go home, different device, log in, my session's there. I just continue working, right? There's a seamless workflow. So you want to look at enterprise file share and sync, because what this will do is, this is just basically Dropbox up there. Dropbox actually now has an enterprise solution. It's somewhat limited, but you've got ShareFile, Dropbox, OneDrive, Box, Ignite. You've got a lot of solutions out there. Pretty much every MDM provider has, a file share and sync solution built in, or something that they recommend or are pushing. So, again, there's something. There's a few features that I want to mention here. You can detach these, just like you can use Dropbox. You can detach these from MDM and MAM. I don't recommend that. What I recommend is you try to containerize these applications, right? So when you're working on the go, they're not taking company data. It's locked down. It's within that wall. So once you deploy this, you prevent data leakage. You get flexible. There's flexible storage on the back end. You can go on the cloud. You can go on premise. You can connect to your network shares. If you got DFS, whatever you've got SharePoint. You can usually set up some sort of connector, so you can still have visibility into your company data on the go, but you're still within this container, right? Still within this containerized wall. So this is really potentially a game changer Because at this point, you can get that seamless workflow, right? If I've got a desktop sync or an email integration option, I can use my file share and sync on my desktop, in my virtual desktop, on my home PC. And then when I'm on the go, I have that same application and the document, right? I can just open it up, take a look at it, put it in the mobile editor, email it if I need on the way to a case. If I'm working on some document, I can check it. So this gives you that access on the go, and you would be able to save it and sync it back up. Right? All right, the last part, I see more and more now, moving to the cloud, but this is something really to look at. The cloud is, I really recommend it for a few reasons. To start with, let's explain what the cloud is doing for you. Right, so on the application side, if you've got this application suite, you can move a lot of these applications now to the cloud. They have public or hosted applications. So those of you who are MDM engineers and have had to roll out these applications know how hard it is to stay on top of your certificates annually, your developer agreements, your provisioning profiles. When there's new operating systems coming out, you have to make sure that you're compatible, that you've got support for that. So once you move to the cloud, all that goes away. You're going to let Android and Apple do all that certificate management for you. You're not going to be handling that. They're going to work on the back end with your MDM provider to take care of all that stuff, that heavy lifting. This also helps with user experience because now you've got compatibility right away. You don't have to prepare applications separately for Android and iOS. And someone comes to me and they say, yeah, but I have this old Mac device, and your application's not working anymore. You're in the cloud, you're leveraging the App Store at this point or Google Play Store, right? So the policy controls are coming from your MDM server. The application code itself is coming from the public store. And on the user side, this is really great, right? When I have to do an upgrade, I don't have to tell my whole firm, hey, we're going to upgrade applications. Here's a document. This is what it's going to look like. If you have issues, call me. Right now, it's integrated. It's seamless in the background. If they've got automatic updates on their phones, it's going to push them with their other updates. Right? So it's a really seamless workflow for the user. We talked about those. On the security side, this also helps because you've got 0-day support, right? You're not waiting for patches to be rolled out. You're not waiting for the next service pack. You're not waiting for the next feature set to be rolled in. And you'll notice this. The MAM providers often will push these in the background, and you'll get the latest feature set. Now, there's some trade-offs involved here, and you should be aware of them. You're losing a little bit of control here, right? So if you're working in-house with your app devs team, and you've got a bunch of applications that you're doing custom stuff with, or you've got custom applications, there's very limited support with most MDM providers to move these to the cloud. So you need to look at, if you can move some of these, I recommend moving them, but you may not want to have a hybrid solution. The other limitation here is obviously you don't have control on the deployment side. I don't think people would really object to that, considering what some of you know about happened last year with the iOS rollout in the fall. And they did a code rewrite, and it took, about 5 or 6 months for some MDM providers to catch up to that code and get it working right. I remember they had pushed an update, and then it got pulled, and they pushed it, then it got pulled, and it was not a lot of fun, right? So you don't have to deal with this. I mean, this will really help on that end. On the server side, so typically an MDM server, you're going to have, a virtual appliance or a Windows box that's your MDM server. And on the back end, there's typically a SQL setup. So you can move this to the cloud, right? You don't have to manage your SQL anymore. They'll have a SQL server you don't see, you don't have eyes on, and they'll just have an MDM appliance up for you. What does this get you? This gets you HA, right? You get high availability, which a lot of MDM providers don't even provide you on premise. But they're providing you 24/7 uptime. They're providing you it's always green. It's always the latest version. It's always patched. You get 0-day support here. You can also look at diverse hosting options for HA. So if you're in the cloud, you can often there's different options. If you want different resource allocation, you want to be on the East Coast and the West Coast. You want to be if you've got offices overseas, you want to have support overseas. So you can set up some hybrid and geodiverse hosting solutions here. This also helps eliminate some additional certificate management. So if you're moving your appliance to the cloud, you're not going to be managing the certificates that you have to maintain on that appliance, right? You're just going to have access to the management interface and manage these applications and the policies. As far as deployment, this is a lot easier. You don't have to actually do the deployment. Usually there's just a cloud connector. Right, and what is that? It's just something you install on a utility server or something on-premise, and it gives you eyes into your Active Directory structure. This is usually a one-way connection. It usually just needs read capability. You don't need to read and write. And I've heard a few solutions say that they are zero deployment, but when you actually come down to it, they need something to see into your network, right? Unless you are going to manually enter username and passwords, handle them separately. I mean, that would be a nightmare. I don't recommend that. All right, so open it up for Q&A. Please use the mic from Mike.
Yes, from me. Questions? Thanks.
You mentioned one of the earlier slides that you have some clients or deployments where you've rolled out the mobile application management, but not the mobile device management. Well, why would somebody do that? Like, what's a use case for you to have just MAM and not MDM?
Yeah, so there's been at least one law firm we've worked with, and the MDM component, there was a lot of resistance because they couldn't actually take out the geolocation tracking feature. So once you installed the MDM agent on the device, it always knew where the device was. It was impossible to turn it off. This was not okay with the lawyers at the firm. Right? So then we had to look at what could we do. Well, we can deploy MAM and we can still get you all your compliance that you need. And it was a little bit of back and forth to explain this to them, but we were able to deploy it without it. So if there's any features like that where they're actually locking, you can, in addition to that, forget about geolocation, you can wipe your phone, right? You can see which applications are on your phone. So if there's resistance to that, if the BYOD policy doesn't really allow you to have that control to wipe the device, that would be an instance where you'd want to just roll out MAM.
Got it. Thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, here we go.
I use an iPhone, and I'm not overly fond of the email or the calendar that's on it. I've heard Zen Mobile has a better client that it provides. Have your clients provided you any kind of feedback on that one way or the other, whether they find it any easier or any better?
Yeah, that's the user interface is definitely something to look at when you're looking at options in the MAM space. I'm a Citrix guy, so I know Zen Mobile, and I use the Zen Mobile interface. This wasn't a demo, so if after the session you want to see, I can show you on my phone what it looks like, the interface. I love it. There's a few reasons I like it. I have an iPhone also. The mail, contacts, and calendar are combined into a single application, just like it is on your desktop, right, when you're using Outlook. And so you're delivering a similar experience to the desktop on your mobile app. And I like that because I want to be able to pull up my calendar when I'm responding to an email and I need to tell them when I'm available. Or if I need to contact someone, I'd rather not click out of the app. There's a few other features in Zen Mobile that I really like. That mirror the desktop experience differently from the native iOS. One of those is the conversation view. If you've noticed since last year on iOS, it's just a long conversation. You don't have a conversation view where you can zoom out and see the different entries. So Zen Mobile gives you an option. You can use both. So I like to have those grouped. Additionally, attachments aren't at the bottom. like in your desktop Outlook client, the attachment is right under the subject line. I really appreciate that because I often don't know whether there's an attachment. I start reading an email, and there's a long conversation thread troubleshooting something, and I scroll down, and I scroll all the way down to see the attachment. So, yeah, I'm partial to Zen Mobile. I like it. I like the interface, and I'm happy to show you afterwards if you're interested.
Thank you for that. If I could ask a second question.
Sure.
You mentioned Kerberos before, basically the syncing of an Active Directory password when somebody has to change it after 6 months or 3 months or whatever it is, and then it comes down to the phone automatically. Does Zen Mobile do that? The last I heard, and this was quite a while ago, they didn't. Do they have that deployed at this point?
I haven't seen it deployed. I can talk with you afterwards. I mean, we can definitely work on that. As far as I know, that wasn't available. And again, there's some security concerns with that also, right? You got to make sure that, I don't know what the compliance is that you need to be in, but the user needs to authenticate at some point. Again, check in with the system. There might be concerns about spoofed cloned devices, if there's some sort of remote hacking of the device. There are some considerations there for policy, but yeah, as far as I know, Zen Mobile, there hasn't been any announcement of a change in that.
And while I'm at it, there's a number of policies, all of them have policies, whether it's Mobile Iron or AirWatch or right. Zen Mobile. How does Zen Mobile policies stack up against the other products as far as the controls that you can put in place? Yeah, the competitors have been coming strong, and they're doing better, but Zen Mobile still leads in the application suite as far as policy control. They have the most fine-grained policy control as far as the most recent data I have on that. They also have the most flexibility that I've seen working with third-party applications. Thank you.
Sure.
You maybe throw it.
My firm, the execs went, we don't like this containerization. On top of that, the alerting, it doesn't alert. Email doesn't alert when it's containerized. So has Zen Mobile, have you all been able to use the native email client and lock it, containerize it without being in a container?
There are a couple clients with big application development teams, and I've seen them actually work on wrapping native iOS because they don't like the interface for Zen Mobile. So I've seen that. You can do that. One thing to test also with containerization, I've seen issues with push and badge notifications. Often those had to do with how these were deployed on-premise. If you try the public or hosted application, you may find that it works much better than the one that's deployed on-premise that's custom wrapped. But there is support for that. I've seen attempts to wrap OA. I've seen successful attempts to wrap native iOS mail, and also I think on Android as well. You can talk to me afterwards. I give you some data on that. I've attempted some wrapping of third-party applications.
Here you go. Sorry, that pillar's kind of.
Sorry. Quick question here on basically passive listening devices, because some people have Hey Siri enabled on their phones, and I haven't seen a setting to disable that function. I've only seen the setting in MDM where you can just disable Siri entirely, but that's like crippling for most of us, right? Not being able to use Siri. So, we want to just be able to target Hey Siri versus Siri entirely. Is there any new or consideration on being able to have that hook inside of MDM, or does that already exist?
You mean like to do a per app Siri restriction?
Well, when you've got the phone sitting on your table, and you say Hey Siri, if you have it enabled, it will respond to you.
I see, just the passive feature.
Right, meaning that it's always listening for those words.
I haven't seen that, but I'll pass that along to Zen Mobile. I haven't seen that.
And I'm not sure if it's just the iOS hasn't opened it up as a hook yet.
I think it's Apple.
Yeah.
Yeah, that happens a lot. I get requests, or I'm working with the client and they'll say, well, this doesn't work, and I go back and it's an Apple code restriction.
Right.
Like the screenshot restrictions, you don't have the fine grain level on app. That's an Apple thing. That's not an MDM thing. Syncing public folders, or drafts. That's an active sync thing, right? That's not on the MDM side. So yeah, some of these things you just have to find out like where it is, but I imagine this is tightly controlled by Apple, and that's probably why they don't have that level of control yet.
Nice. Thank you.
Sure.
From the application development side, have you seen any preferences when you start when you start putting these containers in? The applications that are being developed, are they more just kind of like web applications that you just go through secure web, or are they actually creating applications and hosting it from the App Store?
I actually see a lot of creating of applications hosting the App Store. They're typically like Office Suite type applications. I've seen some accounting, some like in the document space, some of those. So I see pretty extensive use of wrapping third-party applications. If you've got the knowledge or the know-how or the skill set, or someone who does, I think it's pretty open-ended.
Okay. And does the containerization? I'm sorry, messed up the word. But does that allow you to, if you have an application, does it allow you to push like notifications to the devices?
Yeah, there's, and this is again, it's a little bit more on like if you're using Apple, it's on the device, the vendor side. So it depends on the provider, but yeah, so typically if you've got Apple, you'd have a APNS, push notification certificate, and you'd have to renew it every year and push it. Recently, they've added innate support for that, especially if you're public or hosted. So you don't actually have to do any of that certificate. It's just native. It's built in. I've seen some issues on Android, and then the big issues I see with the notifications are changes when there's a code update, usually in the fall, and then there's a gap sometimes of a few weeks until they catch up. And you just have to hammer them. I mean, I just call support, they'll get flooded, and they'll fix it.
All right, cool.
And then the other issue sometimes is with backgrounding. If it gets backgrounded, sometimes it kind of that function kind of dies. And I've also seen an issue with Wi-Fi networks, and it's especially in an office, and they've got a Wi-Fi network. It's often very locked down, so you want to make sure that they can still access your MAM and MDM IPs from inside the network. You could just make it so that the public IPs are available for them, or you could just set up a different NAT inside.
Okay. And sorry, one more question.
Yeah.
So while I was actually looking through the Zen Mobile API stuff, I kind of, I don't know how latest that was, but saw something around iOS not supporting, Zen Mobile on iOS not supporting location. So like if you want to target an app and say, well, based on your location, provide certain services, you can't really do that. Is that
based
true?
on location? I didn't catch the last part.
So you cannot enable like location-specific services. So it doesn't let you target users' locations. Is that true?
We'll have to check on that. I mean, we can check on that, but I thought they had that. Last I checked, they either had that or were working to have that. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry, but you were talking about the APIs, right?
Yeah.
I'd have to look into that. Yeah. Sorry.
Hi. Could you talk a little bit about per app VPN and user experience, whether or not you see a lot of problems where users are dealing with this?
So it has to be deployed. I mean, per app, so if you're using Zen Mobile, you have an option with the NetScaler to set up a per app micro VPN tunnel. So every time they use the app, it's actually a very secure private connection opening up, and they close the app and it closes, right? So just opening up for access for data. This is what I've seen is it really depends on how well it's set up. the timeouts are really, really critical here to get right. Those timeout settings in the environment I was talking about was actually for an app that had a per-app micro VPN. So it was a very tight connection. And so it was just every 25 hours it was cutting out. And the admins who deployed it didn't really have an understanding that you're coming in through the NetScaler and that you've got, that's your session, right? That's your authentication session coming in. They didn't really understand that. They're like, yeah, but the MDM server, it's open. And I'm like, yeah, but it doesn't matter. I mean, if the session gets timed out for your authentication, you're out, right? Your session gets dropped. So that was one thing I saw. I did see an issue where in that same environment, the network guys didn't want to open up some stuff on the network, and they weren't able to deploy the micro VPN for a couple of those apps. I think they ended up getting around that, or they just pushed him hard enough, so he ended up caving at some point. But it was just, they just had to open up the right settings on that.
So does the tunnel for the per-app VPN, does it stay up all the time? For example, let's say I'm using an accounting app that I've published, or it's a web app that's got to get internal. And when I go, and I've got it on a home screen, so when I bring it up, it fires off the tunnel, right? If it goes into the background on an iOS device, or I haven't touched it in 2 or 3 hours and I'm on 3 other apps, is that tunnel still running, or does it just come up and down as it comes to the forefront?
It depends how you've got the settings set up. I would recommend that you have your idle session timeout be pretty low on that if you wanted those to make sure that it cuts out, that it times out. I'd leave the force session timeout pretty long because somebody's working. You don't want to force them out. I would lower the idle timeout down and make sure it cuts out, but that's only supposed to open up when you're actually accessing the content. Right? If it's in the container, it's only when you're actually opening up the container.
Other questions? All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Don't forget to fill out a session evaluation.